This week on Solitary, Poor, Nasty, Brutish, and Short, Scott sits down with Nigel Biggar, an Emeritus Regius Professor of Moral Theology at the University of Oxford and the author of more than a dozen books, including Colonialism, A Moral Reckoning, What's Wrong with Rights, and In Defense of War. He chairs the board of the Free Speech Union, lectures internationally, and writes regularly for major newspapers and magazines. Enjoy!
Thanks so much for coming on to the show.
Not at all.
My first question, I want to turn over to you before I get into the big list of things I want to talk about. What's been on your mind recently? Are there any intellectual or moral questions that you find yourself returning to again and again these days?
Well, my mind is concentrated often by what's going on in the House of Lords, of which I'm a member. So this morning I spent a couple of hours writing a letter to the Times newspaper and collecting signatures from fellow peers against an article that appeared in the Times this morning saying that opposition to the bill to legalize assisted suicide is all being organized by a small coterie of reactionary conservatives, whereas in fact the opposition is widespread. So at the moment, my interests tend to be shaped by what's going on in the House of Lords. Another topic has been the UK government's decision to surrender the Chagos Islands to Mauritius and to pay a lot of money for the privilege of surrendering it. But that brings in larger questions of international law and what international law is. To what extent is international law really a matter of majority opinion among members of the UN? So is it really political more than legal? Those are some of the questions that occupy me. But I've also been I just finished watching the 3 episodes of David Olusoga's BBC series on Empire. And I've been taking copious notes, and I shall shortly sit down to write a critical review. So,
anything lighter? Any fiction or television shows?
Anything lighter? Well, I'm quite keen to go and see Titanic in London, which is a kind of it's
in the West End. It's a play.
Yes, but it's a spoof on the famous romantic film Titanic.
Yeah, right.
But it's a spoof. It's a musical, and it involves a small group of actors playing several parts and running around.
Right. Okay.
I saw the same kind of presentation of John Buchan's 39 Steps at the same theatre about 10 years ago, and it was a scream. So yes, I do have some light entertainment too.
I remember seeing Titanic for the first time, young Leonardo DiCaprio.
Yes, of course.
Yeah.
What is that? 20 years ago now?
Something. Yeah, it makes me feel old. On the second to last point, Empire. This is obviously something that you've focused a lot on. I think just for the sake of speaking the same language, and for listeners, maybe we could just, start off with simply defining, what empire is, whether historically, yes, morally, politically. How would you define empire?
I would define empire as a political situation where one people dominates another. It's a very loose definition.
What does dominate mean?
Different forms. You could say that the political and economic and cultural dominance of the US since the Second World War, it's a kind of loose empire. But that's.
I would say that.
We're
going to talk about that.
It is. And a lot of British Empire in the 19th and 20th centuries didn't involve government, involved a financial power.
Yeah. We're going to talk about that also.
Yeah. So, but basically, there's no very strict distinction between an empire and a nation state insofar as lots of nation states, as we have them now, expanded from smaller units, and they expanded usually by conquering other peoples. So there was a time, when the Kingdom of Wessex, the Anglo-Saxon Kingdom of Wessex, was expanding and overcoming the Danes and then the Mercians in the 9th, 10th centuries, before it was a stable state of England by the end of the 10th century, what you had was, if you like, the imperial expansion of Wessex. But that would be very common. So there's no strict distinction between a nation state and an empire, because many nation states began as empires.
We have plenty of modern nation states which wouldn't conceive of themselves as empires.
No, I guess, I mean, the exceptions to that would be, for example, new post-colonial states. Although they before they became independent, they did involve...
Many of them were.
They did involve one people dominating and expanding. And empire, let's be clear, is not something just white people do or Europeans do. Empire has been a universal feature on the political landscape from the dawn of time. All sorts of peoples expand and dominate.
Yeah, why is it that people have such short historical memory? I mean, you could say it's a question of education. It's a question of people genuinely not, being aware of things. But let's just say, on empire, subjugation, slavery, any of this. This is not unique to Britain or to any modern country. This has existed for all of human history. Why does that not tend to factor into contemporary debate?
So a couple of reasons, Scott. I think one is people like you and I. We spend time in the extraordinary occupation of reading books. I read a lot of them. So you and I will know that the Aztecs, the Incas, and the Assyrians, and the Zulu, and the Mughals, they did empire long before Western Europeans started to do it, or Americans. But most people who've had a school education, they may have picked up bits and pieces, but it'll be very, very fragmentary. And the truth is, most citizens in my country, in Britain, in your country, in the United States, most citizens have very patchy historical understanding. So that's one reason. The other reason,
most things, not just of.
No, that's true. It's true. Most people.
They're focused on getting by every day.
Most people are not academics. Yeah. they don't do the kind of things we do. But the other reason, Scott, is there is a political motive in some quarters for making us focus on empire and its sins on the part of white people, of Europeans. A political motive because, for example, in this country, starting news actually with the upsurge of Black Lives Matter, the movement after the killing of George Floyd in 2020, where the narrative was and is that the US is systemically racist, and this has to do with historic slavery, and slavery goes back to the very foundations of the US. The story here is Britain is systemically racist because of colonialism, which can be summed up in one word: slavery. And therefore we have to criticize and repudiate British imperial colonial history as a way of repenting of our systemic racism. Now, so this serves the purpose of professional anti-racist groups, serves the purpose of people who have made a career out of being anti-racist. I mean, if the problem is solved, they lose their purpose, and it also serves the purpose of Caribbean countries or African countries who now want to claim financial reparations for that. So there are political motives for this historically disproportionate focus on white European British empire and slavery.
You know, it reminds me of dating apps. You know, these online dating apps.
I'm told it's after my time.
You're on the app trying to meet. I thankfully have a loving partner. But if you're scrolling through the app trying to find a partner, it's not in the interest of the app to match you with anyone. I want to keep you on the hamster wheel, right?
Okay.
It's the same thing. You solve the problem of your underlying cause, and you're out of a job.
Right.
You know, you match someone with somebody with whom they're actually compatible.
Yes.
You lose a customer.
Yes. Yeah, it is like that.
I think, personally, my opinion is that some of this is that foreign influence in domestic politics, whether in your countries or mine, is not to be discounted or underestimated. The idea that subversive campaigns are not robustly and actively being pursued today by Britain, by the US, and by most other countries in the world to some extent, is ridiculous. Yeah. They absolutely are being pursued. And some of the sort of more crazy ideas, it would make sense. Like, how might one interrupt the cultural hegemony of the United States, the current cultural hegemony, by depicting its moral failings? Yeah. The same of the UK.
It is. So there's no doubt that this narrative about the US and about the British Empire is politically useful, for example, for the Chinese, because there have been instances where Canadian diplomats have been criticizing the Chinese for their human rights record with regard to the Uyghur people. And the Chinese counterparts have turned around and said, "You have no moral standing to criticize us because of your colonial genocide in Canada,
right? Or this or that, right? That's
So there's no doubt it's useful. And I spoke to a friend in Australia who's had dealings with Australian intelligence services, and I said, I'm wary of conspiracy theories, but is there any evidence that China has been intentionally exploiting these kind of narratives? And he said to me, yes, there is, but it's not public. But there is. Yeah.
It's like, you ever see that Yuri Bezmenov interview from the 80s?
No.
He was a Soviet, I can send it to you after. He's a Soviet former KGB guy, and he talked about how to demoralize a nation and how, the like long-term plan. And
right.
You listen to this, and it sounds like,
yes,
many of the things are hard to ignore.
Well, we know there are all sorts of bots being pushed about by state actors, and
I don't think it's a conspiracy theory, and I'm not a specialist in this area. I think there's no question that foreign influence plays a role in domestic politics, and just hearing you talk about some of this, I think, how and why are some of these ideas, some of these bad ideas, or very unnuanced ideas being spread, promulgated, proliferated, probably with help from those in whose interest it is to promulgate such ideas. Yeah. Which is the people who will be out of a job. But they seem to me to be kind of useful idiots in some ways.
Yeah, and I don't want to be entirely cynical, because I think some of them really believe it.
There's no question they believe it, but it's and some of it obviously is coming from them. There's a huge literature of post-colonial literature across of most of the humanities now.
And yet, well,
but it serves something else. It serves to undermine. Well, it serves to undermine what?
Well, I think it serves to undermine. Well, it does several things. It removes the moral standing of diplomats.
Mm.
It allows the Chinese to turn around and say, "You've no moral standing. You can't lecture us." So it disempowers Western diplomats. In the case of Britain, it also puts the British on the back foot when CARICOM, the body of 15 Caribbean nations, and the African Union come to number 10 and say, here's the bill for reparations for slavery. If you believe this narrative, and too many of our elites believe the narrative, then we're vulnerable. And I first took an interest in this question of colonial history, Scott, in 2014, when there was a referendum on whether Scotland should become independent of the UK. That's to say whether the UK should disintegrate. And I was an opponent of Scottish independence, and am, but I felt the need to read what the proponents were saying, and one argument they made was that Britain equals empire equals evil. Therefore, Scotland needs to purify itself of this wicked post-imperial Britain and sail off into a bright, new, shiny, sin-free future. But having read about British imperial history for 20 years, I knew that the simple equation, empire equals evil, is just not tenable historically or morally. But the point is that narrative, empire equals evil, was being used to justify the disintegration of my country. So these stories have political power, and that's why they're important to contradict.
Maybe if Scotland wants to succeed, we can make it the 53rd state after Greenland and Canada.
Maybe, yes.
No, I mean, part of what this makes me think about is tech companies who operate big, what do you call them, oligopolistic or monopolistic tech companies, which exist more like nation states or empires than private corporations. There's a professor here, Vili, I can't pronounce his last name. He's from Finland, who wrote a book called Cloud Empires.
All right.
My question is whether or not you have a read on how big tech, whether it's Palantir, Meta, are operating in, your kind of read on this argument that we have today companies, and this is not necessarily new. We've had, the British East India Company, for example, immediately comes to mind, but tech companies which operate outside of any one country or even, across many different jurisdictions,
Yep.
which, to use your definition at the beginning, one group of people is dominating another group of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's a lot of literature on sort of surveillance capitalism and how this works, but I'm curious if you see a parallel.
No, there is, and you're right to mention the East India Company. So a lot of British Empire started off through commercial organizations. The East India Company is the most famous of them, which started off in, I think it was chartered in 1600. And it built a commercial empire. This was a private organization, a private commercial body, commercial empire right across the Indian Ocean, not just India, but Malaysia and Africa, and up to Hong Kong. And it was British, so it had it was based in this country, but it wasn't a state-owned company, but it was British.
State-sponsored, perhaps. They had a royal
yes,
charter.
it was state-sponsored. So the EIC had a monopoly in certain kinds of trade with India. And I suppose that insofar as most of the really big tech companies you're talking about, correct me if I'm wrong, are they not American-based?
They're almost all American-based. I guess the different, they don't have a standing army. The East India Company is a standing army.
Yeah, the EIC didn't have a standing army to begin with. This may be a difference that initially the EIC was simply interested in profit, and in fact all the way through was interested in profit. But what it found was that once it had established trading posts on the coast of India, it found trading rivals in the French, and then it found that Indian rulers were involved in various forms of conflict, and they were allying themselves with the French. So what commercial interests led to military conflict, and that led eventually to the granting of lands. But that wasn't the control of a territory wasn't what they set out to do initially. I doubt very much US-based tech companies will come to govern territory, but let's watch.
Well, that is exactly what I'm thinking about.
Okay,
Nigel.
Okay.
I'm not necessarily thinking about it in the most literal sense of the word of a state governed by Meta or by Palantir or Uber. Yeah. But I do tend to think that, well, on the subject of armies, there's a question about the extent to which, how are armies used, how are standing armies used now versus other kinds of warfare, cyber warfare, drone warfare, whatever. I see structurally and just in terms of like incentive structures, a lot of similarities between these private corporations, which are all US based.
Yeah.
Not all, but almost exclusively based in the US, and yet have reach everywhere in the world.
Yeah.
And
the
empires.
Yeah, the difference. Well, I mean, what allowed the East India Company? What made it develop military forces of its own was that it was operating in a context of weak states that were collapsing. So it's unlikely that some of the American tech companies are going to set up a private army in Britain, but it's conceivable if they were operating, let's say, in a failing state in Africa. They might well end up.
Well, the oil companies, they have, of course, they have mercenaries. They have,
fine.
Blackwater, whatever.
Then you're right. You're right. That then the analogy becomes closer.
Maybe to protect, I don't know, telecom towers or whatever, or microchip. There's a war over natural resources.
Yeah.
It's not direct. Subcontractors of subcontractors of subcontractors, but there is a need to have access to resources, not necessarily to control land so that it can be governed. But again, the East India Company, the army is there to a certain extent to ensure that trade can happen unencumbered, right? In the same way, you need to protect infrastructure, you need to protect towers. I mean, how do you see this?
It's exactly the same, Scott. Then, because the East India Company was interested in commercial profit. Political instability, warfare is bad for commerce. And so the company had an interest in someone sufficiently friendly coming to prevail and imposing political control. And a company could support an indigenous ally indirectly through finance, or it could provide troops and technology of its own. There's different ways of doing it. But no, I do see a parallel there, because the other likeness is that the East India Company, when it started off, really was subject to no national government control. The British Parliament gradually, toward the end of the 1700s and into the 1800s, took over more control in terms of supervising the company. I don't know whether that's ever likely. Would the U.S. government? Well, what happened was that when people learned in Britain some of the less scrupulous things the company was doing in India, their misgovernment, people became morally outraged, and Parliament insisted that corruption be stamped out, or it insisted that in the future agents of the company should no longer be able to pursue their own private commercial interests in addition to the companies, which was leading to a lot of abuse. So gradually Parliament asserted control over the company. I'm not sure whether the US government could do that or would do that.
They absolutely could.
Could they?
Yeah, to break up monopolies. There's a lot of antitrust stuff that could be done.
Yes, okay.
It raises some hairy legal questions, moral questions about, interrupting free trade, but many of these companies focus in one way or another on serving not just lay people but governments themselves.
Yes.
The client is in many cases the government, right? Particularly for things involving data, which is an invaluable resource for governments, for defense, for surveillance, for any number of things. There's a commercial side, but procurement. I worked in defense. The government has like almost an unlimited. The DOD or the DOW, I guess we call it now, or MOD has not unlimited, but an extraordinary budget for procuring things from the private sector, and it's big business. So I think about that to the extent that yes, some of the companies could be broken up, but also the state governments, federal government is completely reliant on some of these services, which they just simply could not incubate outside of the private sector. But I want to return to one thing you said about political instabilities being bad for commerce. This gets to a question of incentives. It's actually not bad if you're a defense tech contractor, or there's a book by a guy named Jason Kearns. I don't know where he's based, but it was Princeton University Press. It's called The War That Won't Say Its Name, The Unending Conflict in the Congo. And basically the argument is that neither side has any incentive to stop fighting. And so whenever one side is ahead, the other side will sort of tilt the scales to them so that you never reach a kind of equilibrium because you've created sort of elite classes on both sides.
Yeah, that does make sense.
So it could be good for commerce and some, maybe bad for people in the world.
Well, it depends what kind of commerce. So the East India Company was not in the business of producing arms. It was the business of trading spices and such like. So warfare didn't benefit it. It just cost money.
What do you think has been the most misunderstood part of your work on colonialism, specifically your 2023 book? You've been subjected to a lot of unfair criticism, I think. You've developed quite a thick skin. You've persevered, which I think speaks to your character and is something that is extremely difficult to do. But we can get into some of that a bit later. But I just want to ask, what part of this book do you think has been most misunderstood by critics?
I think so what the book does is to say that the British Empire was not all bad, and chalked up some major humanitarian and liberal achievements. And my critics, and I'm referring to people who've published reviews of the book, my critics, who I find to be generally thoughtless, they see that and they say, oh, Biggar's whitewashing the British Empire. He's pretending it was all rosy. He's pretending that the British Empire did nothing but good. To which I say, did you read page 276?
Yeah.
Did you read the the summary list of the evils of the British Empire, the injustices that I drew from the previous 8 chapters and list them there. Amritsar, slavery, disease, you name it. So whatever I'm doing, I'm not whitewashing the British Empire. But what that reveals to me is that the problem isn't mine. The problem is my critics. They cannot stand the fact that, notwithstanding the bad stuff the empire did and allowed, just like any other long-standing state, you won't find any long-standing state 400 years old worldwide that didn't do and permit bad things. But notwithstanding that, the truth is the empire also did some very, if you like, progressive things. So that's the bit that I mean, for example, one of my most relentless, even obsessive critics, who's an academic.
Your friend over at Cambridge.
No. This is
someone else.
Another one down in Sussex. As soon as my book came out, he published a 15,000-word review essay of the book, in which 15,000 words...
This is Alan Lester?
This is correct. Alan Lester, University of Sussex. Lester could not find a single positive thing to say about my book. Now, I've been around a while. I have written book reviews. I have got the measure of my own work. I know I'm perfectly capable of making mistakes, and I can make wrong judgments, but I'm actually very careful. And I know for certain there are some good things in my book, but Alan Lester couldn't identify them. What's more, in 15,000 words, he could identify nothing good in 400 years of British imperial history. And that's the problem, I think. Some people just... I mean, I'm willing to have an argument about, once you acknowledge this political phenomenon of 400 years contained good stuff and bad stuff, what sense do you make of it? How do you make moral sense of it? And at the end of my book, I make an argument. And I notice that none of my critics, all of whom are historians, have really addressed the argument. Because Scott, I'm a trained ethicist, and I make a moral argument. And it's very clear what the argument is, but none of the critics have got as far as addressing the argument. I think because they're locked into a kind of dogmatic, axiomatic view, empire is bad.
I mean, I am not a trained ethicist or a historian with too many years of experience. I am a student here. But something that just immediately comes to mind is that the negative case is always easier to make than the positive case. Like if I were sitting the All Souls exam and I were given a question, it's much easier to write the negative case of anything. So that comes to mind. The other thing that comes to mind is just the practical, sort of cynical view of thinking, okay, I'm an academic, I need to publish, and so what am I going to do? I'm going to write something that will be inflammatory and negative, and so that I have, write a 15,000 word piece, fill it with that.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt younger scholars of imperial history,
they make a name by kicking at the shins of giants.
Well, they make a name, but also they would be committing career suicide if they agreed with me in public. They wouldn't get promoted or appointed.
We have to reform that.
We're doing.
You're working on it.
I'm working on it. But don't underestimate the degree of fear among academics nor underestimate the extent to which academics are sheep. Academics are generally not made for battle. That's why they become academics. They prefer to observe. They don't like to be in the front seat and take responsibility. This is part of the subject of my next book, which will come out in February, called The New Dark Age: Why Liberals Must Win the Culture Wars. But there's a chapter in there called The Acquiescence of Academics. So a lot of, I'm not surprised there's a kind of tedious chorus of the same kind of thoughtless criticism directed at my book, because there are some rare exceptions, but they're rare.
I think a lot of, I'm sorry, were you?
No, it's fine.
I think a lot of academic philosophy today, one of my gripes with academic philosophy is it's become, particularly analytic philosophy, it's become so technical and divorced from, there's a whole field obviously for practical ethics, but it's become so technical and divorced from like case studies and things that would be of interest to people outside of a small fraternity, that it doesn't seriously engage with the pressing questions of our time. And I don't know if that's unique to philosophy, but it's something that I've noticed in just some of the contemporary academic philosophy that I'm reading. It's like, let me make a tiny micro intervention into this. It's like watering down. So you were saying academics aren't built for battle. It's almost like the more audacious argument, there's just like a dearth of audacity within the academy, or bravery, or I don't know exactly how to articulate this, but it's something that I can feel. Yes. Yeah. The truth is a lot of academic work is really trivial. Why is it just because we want to, you want to kick up the volume of publications, and so it's easier, let's just like make it like these little micro interventions? Where are the big sweeping histories, not to say that we shouldn't be careful and whatever, but there seems to be a lack of audacity, bravery, gall. I mean, I think some of these things are good. Of course, humility is also good, but there's been a tremendous watering down, I think. I mean, you use your word trivial. Some of it's just, it's uninteresting. Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of academic work is very niche, and you can get excited about it if you're an academic. I mean, it is partly academic careers are made on expertise. Well, if you master an area and then you tweak it, and that makes you original. But I mean, I've my ambition has always, Scott, been to move through academe to be in a position to say illuminating things to a wider public. But we forget how distinct the academic species is. Most people, even people with university degrees, perfectly intelligent people, even still, even though I've had practice of writing for the press and preaching from pulpits, still I have people saying, can you simplify that, please? So we forget how abstract we academics can be, and I think that's a fault, because I think there are times to disappear into the kind of intellectual stratosphere, but we do have a responsibility to come down and tell people why this matters. Otherwise, why on earth should anyone fund us? So I think a lot of academic work gets lost in rabbit holes. It's kind of indulgent, self-indulgent. And I mean, the other thing is that I quite like about your work is just the willingness to question dogma. We should evaluate things rigorously, strenuously, really put things to the test. Yeah, of course. Not just accept that this is, how it's always been done. This is, or not even that this is, in many cases, it's actually not how it's always been done. It's a product of, postmodern whatever. But just being willing to not be dogmatic, to question assumptions.
Of course. In my case and in everyone's case, there are particular dogmas that irritate us, or we think this emperor has no clothes, because we care about certain things, and when there. I'm generally against dogmas of any kind. I am myself a religious believer, a Christian, but I still want reasons. I'm not satisfied with simply accepting on authority what's given me. So I guess I'm generally skeptical. I want reasons, but particularly in academia, I guess I've discovered there are some very strong dogmas that are enforced through repressions of various kinds, and I think they're false. I think they're damaging. And people have said to me, Nigel, you're terribly brave in doing what you do, and I'm kind of puzzled. In the same way, I think that a combat soldier who's just gone and rescued his mate out in no man's land would be puzzled if you say you're brave, because I think courage is best understood as a form of love. If there's something you care about enough that is being produced or damaged or disparaged, there comes a point where you just can't stand it anymore, and you have to say no. And in my case, there are certain things that I've cared about, that, not least my own country and its reputation, that I wasn't prepared to stand around anymore and just listen to slander without saying no. But there are too many of my academic colleagues who I think probably know that I'm more or less right, but they're not prepared to take the social and professional risks of saying so.
Would you identify as conservative?
No, I do, yes.
What do you think are some conservative dogmas which ought to be questioned in contemporary, conservative intellectual discourse?
Oh, dogmas. Well, you could have dogmas about small state. Conservatives are in favor of small state.
Like limited government, you mean? Like
yeah,
small state,
but it depends what you mean. My view is the state. Yes, my view is that
a small civil service, a small, welfare programs, this kind of thing.
Yes, my view is that citizens should generally be free to get about their lives, and certainly a state shouldn't overregulate. But there are times, for example, in crises where the state has to grow. So I don't think, even if I think a small state is generally desirable, I'm not dogmatically committed to it, because there are some circumstances where...
To the limited government.
Yeah, the state in this country grew enormously during 2 world wars for reasons of a national emergency, when there has to be control and organization. So in a sense, I'm not dogmatically committed to a small state. It does depend on the circumstances. But I think one of the features of conservative thinking is precisely an awareness of how circumstances matter. And what matters is human freedom, and the state needs to serve human freedom. But in the case of war being perpetrated by a tyrannical enemy, in this emergency, important human liberties require the assertion of the state to defend them. But afterwards it needs to retreat. What are the conservatives? There could be, I've heard recently talk among some young British conservatives the notion that to be British, or to be English perhaps in particular, you have to be ethnically English. Meaning, I'm told that the current leader of the Conservative Party, Kemi Badenoch, was a first-generation black Nigerian immigrant, is not really English, or not really British. And that's a dogma I object to very strongly, partly because what do you mean ethnically English? I mean, or British? I'm British. I'm deeply British. My people came here 1,000 years ago from France. I'm not ethnically Anglo-Saxon. So what are we talking about? And also, I think I am perfectly happy with people with non-white skins who identify with this country and are committed to it, and Kemi Badenoch certainly is. It's a matter really of national identity is a matter of identifying with a country, its institutions, its traditions, and its culture. It's not a matter of skin color. It's not a matter of ethnic origin. But there are some young English nationalists who are conservative who adopt that, and I think that's I regard that as a false dogma.
I would also. We're talking about Britain on the world stage. Britain after World War II has become considerably less consequential to world politics than it once was, which isn't, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Maybe it is a bad thing in some ways. My question is what it would take for Britain to become a consequential player in world politics. Again, of course it's a consequential player. We don't need, we're not going to recreate the 19th century. That's sort of not what I'm asking. The UK has considerably less soft power than it once did.
So, no, you're right. I mean, the British hegemony during the 19th century won't be recovered because that was caused by a series of circumstances that won't come around again. Yes, so after 1945, when the empire disintegrated and Britain was bankrupt, we lost a lot of the power that we'd enjoyed globally up to that point. Nevertheless, my view is, and has always been, okay, right, so Britain is not number one anymore. We know that, but let's not sulk. I mean,
there is a tremendous amount of sulking here, though.
I think there is a lot of sulking here, and some of it goes, well, if we can't rule the world, we're nothing.
One thing is let's not sulk, right? It's like the movie star who's been a movie star for 7 years, and then they have the rest of their life to live. When they fall out of favor, a lot of them find it to be quite difficult. That seems to me a bit like, wow, Britain is.
So let's not sulk, and let's not denigrate ourselves excessively, which is what's going on at the moment. Certainly on the left, there's a kind of self-hatred, which George Orwell recognized even back in the 1940s among intellectuals. So let's not sulk. Let's not indulge in an irrational and groundless self-hatred. Let's have a balanced appreciation of our past and our present power, but let's understand we have power. And I think the main ingredient of a healthy Britain on the international stage is self-confidence. We have power, and we have chalked up in our history some major achievements. We should exercise that to the maximum.
Exercise what?
Okay. I mean, notwithstanding our diminished status, we do have soft power worldwide, partly because of Australia, Canada, the Anglosphere. Yeah. We have close connections.
Barber jackets.
Yes, barber jackets. I was talking to a Chinese friend from Hong Kong a few years ago about the legacy of Britain and Hong Kong, and he said, well, among other things, my grandmother voluntarily left China and came to Hong Kong in the 1950s. She never ever learned to speak English, but she became a lifelong admirer of Princess Diana. So we in strange places we still have soft power. English language, of course, but also this. We still have a significant economy, fifth or sixth in the world, and even if India overtakes us, we're still significant, not least in finance and services. What's more, we still have a significant military, although dangerously eroded. And one thing we have to do is we have to get control of spending on welfare, which this current government are not doing. And we have to invest more in defense, which the current government has promised to do, but is doing nothing about. We have to do that. There was a time when we spent, I think after maybe 40 years ago, we were spending 8% on defense. It's now sort of 2.5, if that. So that has to change. And diplomatic power is related to military power, because I was asking a friend of mine who's an ambassador in the Middle East, I said, do we have any clout in the Middle East anymore? And he said, yes, we do. I said, why? He said, because we can project military power. We have an air base in Cyprus, for example, and we have aeroplanes there, which have done stuff. And he said, because of that, when I call up my counterparts and I want to speak to them, I get to speak because we have clout.
Yeah.
But my basic message is we British need to have a balanced understanding of ourselves, and once we achieve the balance, we don't rule the world, but we have power, and we have, if we're confident about it, people will respect us.
How does that trickle down to the individual level?
Well, I mean,
what say you to the young Brits who will inherit the country?
Well, first of all, you young Brit, you need to achieve a good understanding of the world you've inherited. And you, on average, you live in one of the most prosperous and peaceful and privileged countries and liberal countries on earth. That didn't drop out of the sky, mate. It was built.
Yeah.
It was built. And your ancestors paid high prices to build it. So don't you ever take it for granted. And then admire their achievement. Yes, you can lament their mistakes and you can resolve not to repeat them. Let's do that. Let's admire what we've inherited, because it is not to be taken for granted. Given that, it's your responsibility. You can reform it, you can improve it, but you care for it. Because if you may take it for granted, but people in Ukraine can't take what you've received for granted, because similar things they've received are now under severe threat. And there are powers in the world, whether Russian or Chinese, who want to destroy what you've got. So appreciate what you've received is my basic message.
Last question on maybe just a lighter note. I like to end these interviews with this. Favorite book and favorite film?
Lots of favorite films. I like watching films a lot. I tend to read and like historical material. My favorite film probably is A Man for All Seasons. In 1960s dramatization of Sir Thomas More and his trying to keep alive in the presence of King Henry VIII. It's based on a stage play, but it has a fantastic script. For example, when Thomas More has been forced. Most of the time he tries to avoid committing himself, but eventually he's forced to oppose the king, and he's being tried in Westminster Hall in Parliament. and one of his hostile witnesses is a fellow called Richard Rich. And Richard Rich, having made his testimony, comes past Moore, and Moore says, "Would you stop, Rich? What's that insignia on your robes?" And it turns out that he's the Chancellor of Wales, something. And Moore says, "Really? It profited the man." What's the saying in the Bible about not selling your soul or whatever? But he said, "You've sold your soul for Wales?" I wish I could remember the saying exactly. But the script is really sharp. It's really intelligent and raises all sorts of interesting questions. So, A Man for All Seasons is among my favourite films. Paul Scofield as Thomas More, fantastic. Favourite book, lots of them. One of them I just recently reread is a really striking short book by Alan Paton, South African liberal novelist, writing in the 50s and 60s, and it's called Cry the Beloved Country, about a tragic case of an African man whose son gets in trouble for murdering the son of a white man in South Africa, and the son is condemned to death. But the two fathers meet. But the language is biblical. It's really
fiction.
Memorable. It's fiction. Yeah, it's fiction. It's fiction. A short book, Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Paton. Everyone should read it.
Well, thank you so much for coming on.
My pleasure, Scott. Thanks for having me on.